It started with 5 massive shipping containers, dropped in front of my driveway, no notice. No permission, just steel and silence. My car was trapped, and so was I. But what the HOA didn't realize was that the man they thought they could bully? I'm not just a quiet neighbor, I'm their landlord. And they just declared war on the wrong person. What followed wasn't just a fight over property lines, it became a battle for truth, community, and real accountability. Power, corruption, and consequences, this story has it all. So stick with me, because the twists are just getting started. Hit like, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and let's dive in. I woke up to the sound of a distant, metallic clang. At first I thought it was just the trash truck making its rounds, but as I shuffled into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, I noticed something strange. The house felt too quiet. No bird song, no passing cars. Just an eerie stillness. I pulled the blinds open and froze. 5 enormous shipping containers, blue, rusted, and stacked like a fortress, blocked my entire driveway. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. My truck, my garage, my entire front entrance cut off. Trapped. What in the... I stormed out onto the porch in my slippers and flannel robe, coffee mug in hand. The morning air was crisp, with that unmistakable scent of fall, but I barely noticed. I made it to the edge of my lawn, my eyes locked on the steel wall now occupying what used to be my personal property. That's when I saw her, Cheryl Crowley, president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. Beige pantsuit, pearl necklace, signature smug expression. She was standing across the street, casually watering her geraniums like it was just another day in suburbia. "Morning, Walter," she called out, her voice sweet like syrup. "Surprised? Surprised?" I snapped, pointing at the containers. "Cheryl, what the hell is this?" She clicked off her hose and smiled like she was about to announce the winner of a raffle. "Community Beautification Project. Temporary storage. Part of our new initiative with Western Freight Logistics." "Storage? In my driveway? Are you out of your mind?" The HOA board voted on it last week. "It's only for a few months," she said, as if a few months of being blocked into my own home was no big deal. "I never got any notice." Cheryl shrugged. "Check your spam folder. Everyone else got it." "No, Cheryl. No one asked me. No one voted on whose driveway would be used." "Actually," she said, stepping closer, "we did. And technically, the end of your driveway extends 4 feet into common property. Section 14.2 of the HOA bylaws." I stared at her, stunned. "You're telling me you measured my driveway?" "Dean and Marla did. Yesterday. With a measuring tape and everything," she said, clearly proud of the ambush. Very precise. Dean and Marla, her little HOA foot soldiers, always lurking with clipboards and frowns. They once fined a neighbor for painting his shed too cheerful a shade of yellow. "I want those containers gone today," I said, my voice firm. "Well," she sighed, "you're welcome to bring it up at the next board meeting. Or you could file an official complaint form, but you'll have to come to the HOA office to get it." "The office that's across town?" I asked. "The one with no parking and broken AC?" "That's the one!" she chirped, already walking away. I stood there, heart pounding. 5 years I'd lived in Maple Hollow. 5 years of ridiculous citations, bird feeder violations, mailboxes deemed too decorative, holiday lights not removed by January 20. But this was something else. Back inside, I called the towing company. "I'm sorry, sir," the dispatcher said. "We can't remove commercial containers without proper documentation. You'll need HOA approval." Of course. I spent the rest of the day pacing my living room, occasionally peeking through the blinds like some paranoid old man. My phone buzzed at noon. Text from my neighbor Clara. "Saw what they did. Not right. You okay?" Clara had lived here longer than anyone. A widow, former schoolteacher, the unofficial historian of the neighborhood. I replied, "Come over if you can. I could use a witness." 15 minutes later, she knocked, holding a container of warm apple cobbler. I figured you might need something sweet to go with this sour morning, she said with a wink. We sat in my kitchen while I told her everything: Cheryl's smug smile, the chalk markings on my driveway, the ridiculous clause they cited. She's been like this ever since she got elected, Clara muttered. Thinks HOA stands for her own authority. I chuckled despite myself. She does this every year, Clara continued. Last year, she drove the Martins out over a plastic flamingo. Year before that, it was the Thompsons accused them of excessive wind chimes. It's like she needs a new target to validate her title. Well, she picked the wrong guy this time, I said quietly. Oh? I stood up and walked to the back room, my office. It still smelled like old cedar and ink. I opened my filing cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, and flipped through property records. It was time to remind myself who I really was, not just some guy with garden gnomes and an overgrown rosemary bush. I ran a company, a quiet, discreet one, but powerful. And suddenly, something tickled the back of my mind. Something I hadn't thought about in years. My office building, the same one where the HOA kept their headquarters. I turned to my computer, opened the lease agreements from my property management company, scrolled down the list of tenants. There it was, Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. They'd been renting space in my building for the last 6 years. I stared at the screen, then laughed out loud. They had no idea. The woman who just told me to attend a board meeting to file a complaint had no clue. She was paying rent to the very man she'd tried to bulldoze with HOA power. This was going to be interesting. By the next morning, the neighborhood had already begun whispering. It started with Marla, of course it did. She was the kind of woman who couldn't pass a front yard without finding something to criticize. Over the years, I'd learned to ignore her passive-aggressive remarks. But this time, she wasn't just talking, she was rallying. I opened my mailbox and pulled out a thick envelope stamped with a Maple Hollow HOA seal. Inside were 4 separate violation notices, all dated the previous day. Violation #1. Mailbox height exceeds standard limit by 1.5 inches. Violation #2. Rosemary bush encroaches into pedestrian walkway, estimated 2.3 inches. Violation #3. Solar-powered landscape lighting not pre-approved by HOA. Violation #4. Storage shed door color deviates from HOA palette. I blinked. The shed was gray. HOA approved gray. And the mailbox? It hadn't changed since I moved in 5 years ago. That rosemary bush had been trimmed just last weekend. I called the HOA line, which routed straight to voicemail. Hi, this is Walter Granger at 118 Pinebrook Lane. I received a cluster of citations this morning that I believe are retaliatory. I expect this to be reviewed and reversed immediately. I hung up and immediately dialed my friend Pete. They're escalating, I said. 4 violations overnight. You think that's coincidence? Nope, Pete replied. That's a power play. She knows you've got leverage now, so she's digging in. It's like she's daring me to respond. She's trying to make you look like a crank before you strike. That made sense. If she could paint me as just another angry retiree with too much time on his hands, anything I revealed later might look like a personal vendetta. Then came the visit. Around 3 p.m., I was sipping lukewarm coffee on my porch when Dean pulled up in his golf cart. Yes, a golf cart. He insisted it was better for the environment, though he lived 5 houses down. He stepped out slowly, clipboard in hand, khakis ironed with military precision. Afternoon, Walter. Dean, I said coolly. Just doing our weekly inspection. Thought I'd stop by in person. He squinted at my bushes, then at the crack in my walkway that had been there since 1996. He scribbled something down. Nice containers, huh? I added. Dean stiffened. They're part of a community initiative. They're blocking my driveway. Temporarily, he replied. And illegally. He ignored that and pointed to my porch. Are those bird feeders? Yeah. Why? Policy 3.6. 3 no bird feeders visible from the street. They attract non-native species. I nearly laughed. You're serious? Dead serious. I stared at him for a long moment. You know you're making this worse. Dean shrugged. I don't make the rules. You enforce them selectively. Selective enforcement is a matter of interpretation, he said without blinking. I watched him leave, his golf cart zipping back toward Cheryl's house. Less than an hour later, I received an email from the HOA. Proposed fines pending review. $450. They weren't subtle. This was war. Later that evening, Clara stopped by again, holding a small tray of cranberry muffins. I heard from Lana over on Birch Street, she said as she sat down in my kitchen. Apparently, Cheryl's been telling people, you're trying to sue the HOA because you didn't get your way. I frowned. I haven't sued anyone. Yet. She said you've been a problem neighbor for years, that you don't follow the rules, that you're trying to take over the HOA to remove restrictions. I rubbed my temples. She's building a narrative. Exactly, Clara said. She knows your secret's going to come out. She's preemptively poisoning the well. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the ticking of the clock above the stove. I need to move faster, I muttered. Clara looked at me carefully. What are you planning, Walter? I looked back at her, steady and certain. I'm going to pull the rug out from under them, I said. But I want to do it the right way. No tricks, no threats, just truth and leverage. She nodded slowly. If anyone can do it, it's you. Just be careful. Cheryl doesn't like to lose. By the end of the day, I'd received 7 separate messages from neighbors, some supportive, some skeptical, a few vague and non-committal. But one stood out. A man named Eli Marcus, who lived 3 streets over, sent a short text. They did the same thing to me. Let me know if you want the documents. My heart skipped. What documents? I typed back. I'm listening. By the time the sun dipped behind the evergreens lining Maple Hollow, I had Eli Marcus sitting at my kitchen table, a worn accordion folder in his lap. He was a thin, soft-spoken man in his late 50s. I'd seen him before walking his golden retriever at dusk, nodding politely, always keeping to himself. I never knew he'd been targeted too. They fined me $1,200 in 1 month, he said, sliding a paper across the table. Claimed I violated fence height, window tinting, and had aggressive flora, whatever the hell that means. I flipped through the violation notices, same formatting, same tone, same rigid language. I'd received just days ago, but Eli had gone further. He'd started documenting everything. They did this after I spoke up at a board meeting, he said. Told them I didn't like how they changed the voting process without notice, and Cheryl didn't take that well. He shook his head. Next thing I knew, Dean and Marla were showing up twice a week with tape measures and cameras. My wife couldn't take it. We sold the house within 6 months. I clenched my jaw. It was the same pattern Clara had warned me about. A quiet, targeted push until the unwanted neighbor packed up and left. They do this every year, I muttered. Pick someone, drive them out, tighten their grip. I tried to fight it, Eli said. Even threatened legal action. But they wear you down. I had no leverage. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the tabletop. That's where I might be different. Eli raised an eyebrow. So I told him about the containers, about the citations, about the lease agreement I'd uncovered, about Westgate Commercial Plaza, the small strip office complex I'd bought years ago as a quiet investment through my company, Northwood Equity Holdings. I never paid attention to who rented what. It was all handled by my property manager, I said, until I saw the HOA listed as a tenant on my last lease summary. Eli stared at me, slack-jawed. Wait, you own the building where the HOA has their office? I nodded slowly. And they don't know that? They have no clue. My company name is on the lease, not mine. For a long moment, Eli just laughed. Walter, that's incredible. It's something, I said. And with the lease up for renewal next month, I have a window. You can evict them. Technically, yes. But I'm not interested in revenge. I want to force change. Good luck with that. Cheryl doesn't change. She doubles down. I glanced at the HOA bylaws spread out on the table. Then I'll make it so doubling down becomes the more painful option. That night, I barely slept. My mind spun with ideas and strategy, flipping between anger and calculation. I pulled out every lease document related to the HOA's office space, highlighting clauses, scribbling notes in the margins. Their lease had no automatic renewal clause, which meant I could alter terms or cancel it entirely. But what really intrigued me was Clause 6. 3. The landlord reserves the right to request early termination in the event of code violations or use of premises deemed harmful to public interest. I smiled. Oh, as love their rules. Let's see how they handle mine. The next morning, I called Pete. "You're serious?" he asked, half laughing. "You've been their landlord this whole time. I didn't even know until 2 days ago." "Do not tell them yet," he warned. "You only get to play that card once. When you drop it, it needs to be surgical." I was thinking at the next HOA meeting. Pete whistled. "That's dramatic. I like it. I want them all there. Cheryl, Dean, Marla, and a room full of neighbors. You planning to hit them with the lease?" "And a list of demands," I said. "Make sure they're reasonable," Pete added. "We're not going for petty revenge here. You want reform, transparency, fairness." "Exactly." He paused. "And Walter, be ready. When you corner people like this, especially the ones used to controlling everything, they don't go quietly. I'm counting on it." I spent the day preparing. I wrote a formal lease amendment proposal. I printed copies of the violations Eli had saved. I annotated the bylaws with sticky notes. I even called the county to request a property survey of my lot, just in case they tried to pull any more nonsense about community easement. Then I drafted a quiet little email to the HOA board, to the Maple Hollow HOA. I'd like to reserve time on the agenda for the next board meeting to discuss property access issues and community management procedures. Respectfully, Walter Granger. No threats, no accusations, just a gentle knock at the door. Let them invite me in. That evening, just before sunset, I stepped onto my porch with a fresh cup of tea. The containers still loomed like silent monsters across my driveway. I snapped a few more photos for documentation, measuring tape in hand, just for good measure. Then I noticed something. A figure across the street. Cheryl stood in her window, arms crossed, watching me through the blinds. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know how close the walls were closing in. 3 days later, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the collar of a freshly pressed button-down shirt. No tie too formal, no t-shirt too casual. This wasn't a fight. Not yet. This was a reveal. And I wanted it to land just right. I'd never looked forward to an HOA meeting before. Usually, they were a dull blur of budget line items and lawn care complaints. But tonight would be different. I double-checked my satchel. Lease copies, photos of the containers, a folder marked HOA board misconduct, preliminary evidence, my business card, crisp and sharp. Everything was in place. As I stepped outside, the early evening sun cast long golden shadows across the street. I looked at the massive shipping containers still blocking my driveway and gave a wry smile. "Not for much longer," I muttered. Since that first violation letter, I'd received 3 more. 1 for unauthorized gnome activity, yes, really, and 2 about the color temperature of my porch lights. Cheryl's game was intensifying, but mine was just beginning. I walked to the community center, my car still imprisoned. Along the way, a few neighbors waved politely, but most averted their eyes. Fear and politics had poisoned this place. People didn't want to get caught on the wrong side of Cheryl. Clara, however, stood proudly by her mailbox, arms crossed like a general surveying the battlefield. "Big night," she said. "You're coming?" "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world," she smiled. "They've had this place under their thumb for too long." As I entered the community center, the air buzzed with anticipation. There were more people than usual, likely due to the growing buzz about Walter's rebellion, as some were calling it. The chairs filled quickly. I took a seat near the front this time. Cheryl sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Dean on one side and Marla on the other. Dean was furiously typing something into a laptop. Marla adjusted her glasses and whispered into Cheryl's ear. Cheryl, for her part, kept glancing at me. She was nervous. Good. At exactly 7 p.m., she tapped her gavel a little too hard. "I call this meeting to order," she announced. "First on the agenda, community partnerships. As many of you know, we've entered into a temporary logistics agreement with Western Freight for container storage. The revenue will go toward new landscaping and additional security for Maple Hollow." There were polite claps. One man in the back gave a half-hearted woo. "Now then," Cheryl continued, "Mr. Granger has requested time to speak. You have 5 minutes." I stood calmly, walked to the front of the room, and set my folder on the podium. I could feel dozens of eyes on me. I took a breath. "Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the time. I won't need 5 minutes, but I might need your attention." A few chuckles. Cheryl's smile tightened. "I moved to Maple Hollow 5 years ago. Like many of you, I expected a quiet, respectful community. What I got was something very different." I pulled a stack of papers from the folder. Over the past week, I've received no fewer than 7 HOA violations, ranging from mailbox height to rosemary bush encroachment. These citations arrived after I expressed concern about 5 industrial shipping containers blocking my private driveway. I turned and looked directly at Cheryl. "This isn't enforcement. It's retaliation." Murmurs rippled through the room. Marla scribbled something furiously. I continued. "This HOA has cited clauses from our bylaws, such as Section 14(2) claiming a 4-foot easement on my property. I had my land resurveyed this week by a licensed county surveyor. My driveway is fully on private land. These containers? They're trespassing." I pulled out the survey document and held it up. Dean scoffed. "We have our own measurements." "Which were taken by whom?" I asked. "Marla and a retractable tape measure." A few people chuckled again. I didn't smile. "But that's not the main reason I'm speaking tonight," I said, lowering my voice just slightly. "Let's talk about the HOA office." Cheryl visibly stiffened. "I own the building," I said simply. "The one on Briarwood Plaza. You've been paying rent to my company, Northwood Equity Holdings, for 6 years." Silence. Cold, sudden silence. I pulled out a copy of the lease and placed it on the table in front of Cheryl. "As your landlord, I have full legal discretion over your lease renewal, which is due in 29 days. Gasps now. Whispers. Dean stopped typing. "I'm not here to evict you. Not yet. But I am here to set terms. Reasonable ones." I handed out a single-page summary to each board member. "Effective immediately, I propose the following changes for lease renewal. Immediate removal of the containers from my property. A written public apology for retaliatory citations. Annual board elections with third-party oversight. A clause allowing community votes on future major projects. A review and repeal process for excessive, arbitrary fines." Cheryl's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "This is blackmail." I shook my head. "This is negotiation. The same kind you offered Western Freight to drop a wall of steel on my property." She slammed her palm on the table. "You can't dictate how we operate." "I'm not," I replied evenly. "I'm offering terms. If you reject them, I'll simply find a new tenant. You'll have 30 days to vacate. That's business." There was a moment of pure electric silence. Then, someone in the audience clapped. Just one. Then another. Then 6 more. Until half the room was clapping. Clara stood and gave a little 2-finger salute. Cheryl sat frozen. "Take your time," I said softly. "But not too much. The lease clock is ticking." I should have expected retaliation. By the next morning, someone had dumped a bag of mulch across my front steps. Not the usual kind. Either this stuff reeked like it had been pulled from a compost pile that lost a fight with a skunk. It wasn't subtle. Nor was the message taped to my front door in red ink. Landlords don't run HOAs. Know your place. I peeled it off without a word, went inside, and poured myself some coffee. The war had officially gone from cold to personal. At 11, oh, I'm sharp. My phone buzzed with a call from Pete. "You stirred the hornet's nest," he said. "No hello." "I just got a call from a contact at City Hall. Someone anonymously submitted a complaint claiming your property line encroaches on HOA land." Let me guess, Dean or Marla. Probably. They requested an emergency zoning review. They're trying to flip the narrative. Paint me as the bully landlord abusing my power, Pete chuckled. Too late for that. You've got public support now. And Clara told me someone recorded your entire speech last night. It's making the rounds on social media. You're being called the HOA whisperer. I didn't know whether to laugh or cringe. Let them come, I said. I've got survey documents, lease agreements, timestamps, and witnesses. They want to fight? I'll give them due process with a smile. But truth be told, I didn't feel like smiling. That night, around 8 p.m., I spotted Dean standing across the street with a flashlight. He wasn't even subtle. He was photographing my house from 3 different angles. He lingered at the hedges, knelt by the mailbox, and even measured the distance from my walkway to the street with a collapsible ruler. I didn't say anything, just stood inside with the lights off, watching from behind the curtain. This was psychological warfare now. They weren't trying to prove anything, they were trying to wear me down. They wanted me anxious, second-guessing, afraid to leave the porch. So I made a choice. I opened the door, stepped out, and called across the street. "Getting all your shots, Dean? Want one with me smiling next to the gnomes?" He startled, turned slowly, and gave the fakest grin I'd ever seen. "Just doing a routine inspection, Walter. Don't take it personally." "Oh, I don't." "But I do take it legally. I've already filed a report with the sheriff's office about trespassing and harassment. If you need a formal notice, I can hand-deliver it." He shifted uncomfortably, then climbed back into his golf cart without another word. I didn't sleep well that night. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to the soft glow of a flashlight scanning my backyard. I rushed to the window, but whoever it was had vanished by the time I got there. It could have been a teenager. Or it could have been something else. The next morning, I installed 2 motion-activated cameras and one above the garage that streamed directly to my phone. I emailed Clara the login info, just in case something ever happened to me. I wasn't being paranoid anymore. I was preparing. The tension boiled over 2 days later. I received a summons. Yes, a summons to appear at a special HOA disciplinary hearing. The letter, printed on official HOA letterhead and signed by Cheryl, claimed I had deliberately misled the board, threatened eviction for personal gain, and violated HOA Code of Conduct Section 9(4), hostility toward officers. It was pure nonsense, but it was strategic nonsense. They were trying to drag me into an internal tribunal and brand me a threat to the community. A troublemaker, a destabilizer. I called Pete. What happens if I show up and they try to discipline me? You record everything, and then you sue for defamation and abuse of power. What if I don't show up? Then they'll claim you're dodging accountability. Better to attend and flip the table. So I showed up, not in a suit this time. This time I wore jeans, a flannel, and a soft leather jacket. Just a homeowner, just another neighbor. But in my hand I carried a bound document, a draft of the new lease agreement, with a cover page titled Proposed HOA Reform Terms, Community First Model. I walked into the community center and found it empty, except for Cheryl, Dean, and Marla. 3 chairs on one side, 1 lonely chair on the other. A courtroom built for show. Cheryl didn't even look up when I walked in. "Please take a seat, Mr. Granger. This meeting is being recorded." "Perfect," I said, and pulled out my phone. "Me too." Dean visibly bristled. Marla looked down at her notes like she was afraid to speak. "Walter Granger," Cheryl began, "you are here today to answer for a series of actions deemed hostile and detrimental to the Maple Hollow HOA. Before we begin, do you have any statements?" I stood up. pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket. "Just one," I said. "You're sitting in a building I own. Your lease expires in 27 days. And unless you remove those shipping containers, cease targeted harassment, and agree to a community vote on reform, this will be the last meeting you ever hold here." I dropped the paper on the table. It was a copy of the termination notice, already drafted and signed. Cheryl's hands clenched around her pen. "This meeting," I added, "is over." And then I walked out. The next morning, the phone started ringing before sunrise. First it was Pete. "They called a lawyer," he said. "HOA retained, outside counsel. I just got a heads up from an old colleague, they're panicking." "Good," I muttered. "Not good," Pete warned. "You forced their hand. They're not playing defense anymore. They'll go after your LLC next. Try to discredit you through business records, finances, maybe even claim a conflict of interest." "Let them," I said calmly. "My books are clean." But as I hung up, I wasn't as confident as I sounded. My company, Northwood Equity Holdings, had been operating quietly for nearly a decade. Most of its work was above reproach, but I'd done some creative real estate deals over the years, nothing illegal, just flexible. If someone wanted to make noise, they might find something to twist. Still, I wasn't going to flinch, especially not now. That afternoon, I received a certified letter at my door. It was delivered by a nervous-looking young man in a golf shirt and khakis. I signed for it, closed the door, and opened the envelope. It was a formal cease and desist from the HOA's attorney. The letter accused me of creating a hostile environment, threatening the existence of the HOA, and abusing landlord status for coercive leverage. I scanned down the page until I hit the line that made me laugh out loud. "Your behavior may constitute a violation of Maple Hollow's anti-bullying covenant." Anti-bullying covenant? That's rich, coming from the same board that fined a widow for painting her shutters lilac. I called Samantha, my attorney. She was sharp, aggressive when needed, and had a talent for making bureaucrats squirm. She answered on the first ring. "I saw it. Already?" "Already," filed the response too, and I added a little something extra. "Dare I ask?" "A courtesy notice to their attorney reminding them of your property rights, your right to terminate a commercial lease without renewal, and your right to pursue civil action for harassment. Also, I highlighted 3 potential zoning violations related to those containers." "Samantha," I said, smiling, "I could hug you. Do that after you win." Later that evening, I was sitting on the porch when Clara arrived, holding a battered envelope. "This was taped to my front door," she said, her voice tight. I opened it. Inside was a single printed photo, grainy, low-res of me talking to Eli Marcus in my kitchen. Someone had been watching my house. Clara saw the look on my face and said, "They've done this before. Last year, Mrs. Talbot got anonymous photos of her grandkids playing in the yard after she refused to take down her inflatable Halloween display." "They're not just scared," I said quietly. "They're desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." I didn't have to wait long for the next one. The following morning, I received a call from a reporter at a local news station. "Mr. Granger, I'm with Channel 4. I understand you're involved in a property dispute with your HOA. A few sources have reached out." I hesitated. "What kind of sources?" "Neighbors. Former residents. Someone on the HOA board." "They told you what exactly?" "That a wealthy landlord is trying to take over the HOA to gut the rules and flip homes for profit." I laughed. "That's creative." "So that's not true? I'm not trying to flip homes? I'm trying to free my driveway and maybe the rest of the neighborhood while I'm at it?" The reporter was quiet for a moment. "Would you be willing to go on record?" "Give me until tonight. There's a board meeting at 7. Things may change after that." "Understood. I'll be watching." That night, the meeting room was packed. Word had spread. Dozens of neighbors showed up, some out of curiosity, others in full support. I spotted Eli, Clara, and even Marcus, the quiet guy from down the street, who rarely said more than 5 words at the mailbox. He was holding a sign that read, "Let Walter drive." Cheryl, Dean, and Marla sat at the front, flanked by a man in a gray suit with slicked back hair, clearly the attorney. Cheryl wore a blue blazer 2 sizes too small and a pinched expression like she'd swallowed a lemon. "This special session," she began, "is to clarify recent misinformation spread by certain residents regarding the actions of this board." "I'd like to respond to that," I said, standing before she could object. The attorney opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. "I'm not here to shout. I'm here to show." I walked to the front and placed a folder on the table. "This contains copies of your lease agreement, your violation notices, my property survey, the cease and desist, and my response." I turned to face the crowd. 3 weeks ago, I woke up to find 5 shipping containers blocking my driveway. No warning, no approval, no vote. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Since then, I've been fined, targeted, photographed, and summoned like a child. A woman near the back raised her hand. "Is it true you own the HOA office building?" "It is," gasps. "Again. And I've never once used that position against this community. Until now. Until they forced my hand." I handed out copies of a proposal. "Here's my offer. Renew your lease. Under the following conditions, remove the containers. Repeal retaliatory fines. Implement annual board elections. Allow community-wide voting on major rules. And post full financials online. If you do, I will maintain your rent at current rates. If you don't," I let the pause linger, "you have 30 days to vacate." Dean stood up, red-faced. "This is coercion." "No," I said. "This is accountability." A voice called from the back. I seconded. Then another, "Me too." Someone stood and clapped. Then another. And another. Cheryl's attorney leaned over to whisper something to her. She shook her head stiffly. Then she stood. "This isn't over," she said, voice shaking. "I hope not," I replied. "Because the community deserves a say in how this ends." The following morning, my street looked like the media had moved in. 3 news vans, 2 drones circling overhead, a handful of reporters camped on the sidewalk, bundled in jackets, sipping coffee from thermoses. And smack in the middle of it, all those same 5 rusting shipping containers, still blocking my driveway like an iron barricade. One reporter, Channel 44's Natalie Henson, spotted me as soon as I opened the door. "Mr. Granger, how does it feel to have your own HOA trapping you on your property?" I blinked against the morning sun. "I'd say predictable, but now they have an audience." She smiled. "Mind if we do a short interview?" 10 minutes later, I was sitting on my porch, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee and answering questions while the cameras rolled. Natalie leaned in. "You've become something of a local hero overnight. Social media is calling you the man who took on the HOA. What do you think of that?" I gave a tired smile. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to back out of my driveway. By noon, the hashtags were trending. Hashtag Let Walter Drive, hashtag OA Hell, and my personal favorite, hashtag Containergate. I'd received dozens of texts from neighbors, many anonymous thanking me. But not all messages were friendly. One came from an unknown number. "You're burning the house down with us inside. Stop now." I showed it to Samantha when she arrived that afternoon. "They're spiraling," she said, reading the message while sipping from her travel mug. "Threats are a sure sign they're out of real weapons." "You sure?" "Oh, I'm sure. And better yet, so is their freight partner." She pulled out her laptop and opened an email chain. "Western Freight's legal team contacted Cheryl this morning. They're furious. The PR backlash from this container fiasco is hurting their local contracts." I leaned in. "Are they backing out?" "Not just that. They're demanding the containers be removed within 72 hours. If not, they're threatening legal action." I exhaled slowly. "That's it, then." "Almost," she said. "We still need the public nail in the coffin." That night, the community center overflowed. Word of the previous board meeting had spread far beyond Maple Hollow. People from neighboring HOAs showed up, curious or hopeful. Some brought signs, others brought cameras. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a reckoning. Cheryl looked rattled. Dean wore a grim expression. Marla kept fiddling with her pen like she was trying to disappear into her seat. At exactly 7:00, Cheryl tapped the gavel. This emergency session is to address recent unrest and unauthorized dissemination of private HOA business. You mean, I said, standing, the part where you illegally blocked a homeowner's property, or the fines issued in retaliation, or the surveillance, Mr. Granger? You are not recognized. You never recognize anyone you disagree with, I cut in. But tonight, it's not your call. The room erupted in clapping. Samantha stood and handed out a stack of documents. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, please review the packet. You'll find legal findings, zoning violations, and the latest letter from Western Freight's legal counsel demanding immediate removal of all containers due to breach of contract. Gasps, murmurs. Someone from the back shouted, "She never told us that." Then came the twist. Clara rose from her seat holding up her phone. I have something too. She tapped the screen, and the room went quiet as an audio file played. Cheryl's voice, unmistakable. We need to crush this guy before he stirs up the neighborhood. Make him feel watched. Pile on the citations. Teach him who's in charge. Dead silence. Cheryl's face drained of color. Clara said calmly, my grandson recorded that at a closed-door meeting, I've had enough. We've all had enough. Applause thundered. Someone in the second row stood and said, I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board. I second it. Another neighbor called out. Dean stood abruptly. This is illegal. This isn't a proper forum. Samantha stepped forward. Actually, it is. According to your own bylaws, Section 10:4, if a quorum of residents is present, an emergency vote can be called with majority support. Someone in the back shouted, We're all here. Let's vote. Hands went up, one after another, dozens, then the rest. The board members stared in disbelief as the sea of arms filled the air. All in favor of dissolving the current HOA board, effective immediately? Clara asked, now standing behind the podium. A unanimous chorus. Aye. I watched Cheryl stagger back from the table, her mouth slightly open. She looked around the room like she didn't recognize it anymore. We've built something special here, she shouted. You'll regret this. You need structure, order. No, I said gently. We need community. The fallout came fast. The containers were gone within 48 hours. A small group of neighbors volunteered to repaint the curb where the metal beasts had sat, even planting flowers in the divots left behind. Cheryl resigned and moved out within a week. Rumor had it she sold the house at a loss just to get away. Dean vanished from public life, and Marla quietly apologized to nearly every neighbor on her block. We held a block party the next weekend. There were hot dogs, folding chairs, a local band, and for the first time in years, laughter that didn't sound nervous. I didn't speak at the party. I didn't need to. People came up to shake my hand, to thank me, to offer me cobbler or ribs or a can of root beer. One man, someone I didn't even know, just clapped me on the shoulder and said, You gave us our street back. That night, Clara and I sat on my porch, sipping wine as the stars came out. Think they'll come back? I asked quietly. They always try, she said. Power never goes quietly. But now we know what it looks like and how to fight it. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of children laughing in the distance. The HOA wasn't gone, but its reign was over. The morning after the vote, I woke to find my porch lined with sticky notes. Not threats, not warnings, just simple messages from neighbors. Thank you. We feel free again. Finally, someone stood up. Some were scrawled on yellow post-its, others on the back of grocery receipts. One note just said, Our daughter can hang her rainbow flag again. I stood there barefoot, robe flapping in the crisp morning wind, a mug of black coffee in my hand, reading note after note until the chill reached my toes. Then I stepped back inside and called Samantha. It's done, I said. The board's out. The containers are gone. The vote was unanimous. She sounded cautiously satisfied. Good. But now comes the hard part. What's that? Making sure it doesn't happen again. By noon, the first cracks started to show. Dean, who'd vanished after the vote, was spotted at City Hall. According to a source Samantha dug up, he was trying to file a grievance claiming the vote was invalid, citing emotional duress and procedural impropriety. They were trying to claw their way back. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the email I received just after lunch. It came from a private address, no name, no subject line, just 3 screenshots. Each one was a snippet of a group chat. The names? Cheryl, Dean, Marla. The conversation? About me. Marla, let's teach him a lesson. Containers will send a message. Dean, I'll fabricate the easement stuff. No one double-checks that. Cheryl, make it stick. I want his garden gnomes gone next. I sat there, staring at the screen for a long time. They hadn't just enforced rules. They had targeted me deliberately, maliciously. That changed everything. I forwarded the images to Samantha. Can we use this? I asked. Absolutely, she replied. This isn't just retaliation anymore, it's coordinated harassment. We can sue them personally. The next HOA meeting was unlike any the community had ever seen. It wasn't run by Cheryl, or Dean, or Marla. It was run by a temporary volunteer committee, with Clara acting as moderator. Residents filled the room shoulder to shoulder, holding printed versions of my reform proposal and passing around homemade cookies. Samantha and I sat in the front row. Before we begin, Clara said, "Walter has something to share." I stood, the screenshots in hand. "These," I said, "are messages from your former HOA board members, leaked by someone on the inside." I passed them around. The room went quiet as people read. One woman gasped. Another muttered, "Unbelievable." A man toward the back clenched his fists. "They used our dues to fund this crap?" Clara stood again. "We now have evidence of coordinated harassment, abuse of authority, and potential fraud. I move that we authorize a third-party audit of the HOA's financial history for the past 5 years." Hands shot up in agreement. Samantha added, "And my office will be pursuing a civil case against the former board members for harassment and defamation." It was no longer just about freedom. It was about justice. But that night, something shifted. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a video. Grainy. Nighttime footage from a shaky phone. The camera panned across a familiar front yard, my front yard, then zoomed in on my garage door. A voice whispered off camera, "He's not as clean as he pretends." The camera moved closer. A red laser pointer danced across my security camera, and then vanished. The video ended. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, Samantha came over in person. She looked uneasy. "I pulled the HOA's rental records from the building," she said, setting her briefcase on my kitchen table. "And there's a discrepancy. The rent the HOA paid to your company was $1,800 a month. But in the financial reports they sent residents, they reported it as $3,500. I blinked. They were pocketing the difference? Looks like it. How long? Almost 4 years. I sat down slowly. "That's embezzlement," she nodded. "It is. Can we prove it?" "Yes, but it might trigger a criminal investigation." I stared at my coffee. Good. That evening, I was outside checking the new community bulletin board, a project the neighborhood had started together, when Richard approached me. Richard had once been one of Cheryl's staunchest allies, always grumbling about lawn maintenance and siding color. But since the vote, he'd kept to himself. "Walter," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" "Sure." We walked a few paces down the sidewalk. "I need to tell you something," he said. Something I should have said weeks ago. I waited. Cheryl and Dean. They weren't just power-hungry. They had dirt on people. Old violations they threatened to enforce unless you towed the line. That's how they controlled the board. "You were blackmailed?" He nodded. So was Marla, and at least 5 others before us. My stomach turned. This goes back years, Walter. They kept files on people, photos, emails. One guy tried to run for the board in 2018. They leaked his divorce records. I exhaled slowly. Where are those files now? I don't know, Richard said. But if they're still out there, you might be in them too. That night, I dug through every box in my garage, looking for a specific key, a long-forgotten one to a locked file cabinet in my office at the Briarwood building. When I opened it the next morning, I found dozens of folders, each marked by property address. Inside mine was a printed email chain from 5 years ago between me and my former manager about a zoning loophole. I'd used to increase rent on a different property, completely legal, but easy to twist out of context. There was also a printed image of my backyard, dated 3 weeks before the container incident. They'd been watching long before they acted. This wasn't HOA abuse anymore. It was a coordinated surveillance network built on fear and intimidation, and I had just inherited all of it. That afternoon, the audit committee issued a formal notice to all current and former board members. You are being investigated for financial misappropriation, ethical violations, and retaliatory practices. Failure to cooperate will result in legal escalation. They had 48 hours to respond. We heard nothing for 2 days, until the night of the fire. The flames weren't enormous, more like a smoldering blaze, but they were real. They started in a trash bin behind the Briarwood building, the same one that housed the HOA's now defunct office. A janitor spotted the smoke just after midnight and called it in. Firefighters arrived within minutes and managed to stop it before it reached the wall. Still, the damage was clear. The trash bin had been soaked in accelerant. A rag was found half-burned near the base, wrapped around a glass bottle. Arson. I stood behind the yellow tape the next morning, watching crews haul out the scorched remains. Samantha joined me, her eyes heavy with concern. "Someone's trying to erase something," she said. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We both knew exactly what was in that bin. Old files. Maybe flash drives, possibly the rest of the board's blackmail material. Whatever they hadn't taken, when they lost control, they were now trying to destroy. "This is bigger than anyone thought," she said quietly. "This wasn't about lawn violations or bird feeders. This was a control system. And you kicked out the keystone." "I didn't kick it out," I said. "I showed people they could." Despite the fire, or maybe because of it, the neighborhood changed rapidly over the following week. Without Cheryl, Dean, or Marla steering the ship, neighbors began stepping into roles. No one had expected them to. Clara organized a weekend clean slate event. Residents came out with brooms and paint rollers, scrubbing away graffiti on mailboxes, repainting faded crosswalks, and even replanting community garden beds that had been neglected for years. Eli, once practically a ghost, volunteered to chair the first ever Neighborhood Oversight Council, promising monthly transparency reports and open votes. Even Marcus, who'd once kept his head down to avoid fines for his rainbow flag, offered to redesign the HOA website with easier access to records and a public voting system. Change was happening not from the top down, but neighbor to neighbor. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I kept mostly quiet through it all. People still came up to thank me at the mailbox, in the grocery store, walking their dogs. But I didn't need to be the face of anything anymore. That part was over. I focused on repairing the fence in my backyard, catching up on sleep, and relearning what peace felt like. One afternoon, Clara stopped by with a basket of warm cookies. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said, setting the basket on my table. "What day?" "The one where I look at this neighborhood and feel hopeful." I nodded, but she saw something in my expression. "You're not at peace yet, are you?" I paused. "Not completely." She sat down. "Because of the fire?" "That, and the files, and the fact that I still don't know who sent me those screenshots. Someone inside the board had access, but why leak them to me?" She gave a soft hum. "Sometimes the only way to burn down a system is from within. That evening, I received a text from a number I hadn't seen before. You've done your part. Let the others finish it now. Watch your back. This isn't over. No name, no context. Just that chilling feeling again, the one that told me the shadows behind the old regime hadn't all disappeared. But I chose not to reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Samantha. Let them know I wasn't alone anymore. Later that week, we held the first official community assembly in the old HOA building. The scorched exterior had been scrubbed and painted, windows replaced. Inside, rows of chairs were filled not with angry faces or folded arms, but neighbors who actually wanted to be there. Clara opened the meeting with a quiet smile. No gavel tonight, just people, laughter, applause. The agenda was simple: transparency, fairness, and rebuilding trust. We passed new regulations that capped fines at $50 sand, required photographic proof. We voted to remove restrictions on garden colors and eliminate bylaws that banned seasonal flags. We instituted 2-year board term limits and required a public review period before any new rule could take effect. Each change passed unanimously. As the meeting wrapped up, a teenager in the back row raised her hand. "Can we start a community book club?" she asked shyly. Clara beamed. "Absolutely. Bring your ideas to the next meeting." As the crowd trickled out into the soft glow of the street lamps, I lingered behind. Looking around that room, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not just change, but belonging. I stepped outside and walked slowly back to my house, my breath forming soft clouds in the air. The containers were gone, the fines were gone, but the scars, emotional, communal, historical, they would take longer to fade. Still, the healing had begun. The first warm day of spring came early that year. Birds returned to the oak trees along Pinebrook Lane. Lawns burst into color. For the first time in recent memory, no one sent out citations about grass length or unauthorized blooms. Tulips, sunflowers, daisies, every front yard was different now, gloriously different. I sat on my front porch with Clara, sipping iced tea as the community around us bloomed visibly and otherwise. "Look at that," she said, nodding toward a group of kids chalking rainbows on the sidewalk. "Last year, that would have earned a warning notice. Now it earns applause." I smiled. Across the street, Marcus and his husband were setting up a handmade lending library box. Eli walked by with his retriever, giving me a thumbs up as he passed. A teenager rode past on a skateboard with a poster under his arm. "Community garden launch, Saturday, 10 a.m. This was the neighborhood I'd hoped for when I first moved in. No, this was better. The HOA was still around, but it no longer ruled like a private government. It had become what it was always supposed to be: a group of neighbors helping each other maintain a shared space, not punish individual expression. The neighborhood assembly, as it was now called, met every month. No gavel, no podium, no secrecy. One folding table, a circle of chairs, and cookies. Always cookies, Clara insisted. I still kept my security cameras up, not out of fear, just memory. The fire investigation never turned up a suspect, and the mystery sender of the leaked screenshots never came forward. But the files we did recover led to something more important: a complete overhaul of the HOA's accounting system. Turns out the $1,700 rent discrepancy was just the tip of the iceberg. After weeks of quiet effort, Samantha and a small audit committee confirmed that over $42 had been siphoned through creative budgeting and misreported maintenance expenses. Most of it couldn't be recovered, but the damage wasn't only financial. It was personal, emotional, deep. We decided not to pursue criminal charges. Instead, we published the findings. We named every dollar, every transfer, every fake invoice. Sunlight did the rest. Cheryl never returned to Maple Hollow. Her house sold within a month to a young family who turned her manicured front lawn into a pollinator meadow. Dean was last seen applying for a job at a nearby hardware store. Marla? She stayed. She even helped at the community garage sale in May, quietly, humbly, offering to buy back the patio chairs she'd once written citations for. I didn't speak to her much, but I nodded when I passed. And she nodded back. That was enough. 6 months after the shipping containers were removed, we held a summer block party. Not an HOA-sponsored one. Not with rules about music decibel levels or grill placement compliance. Just neighbors. We grilled burgers and corn on the cob. Someone brought out a karaoke machine. Clara surprised everyone by belting out Patsy Cline like a seasoned lounge singer. Laughter spilled into the streets. No one called the cops. No one threatened citations. As dusk fell and string lights flickered on, I looked around and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Late that night, after the folding tables were packed away and the last kids were collected from the bounce house, I returned to my porch. The street was quiet again. No cameras. No whisper campaigns. No red ink notices stuck to my door. Just a warm breeze. And a small box waiting on my porch. No label. No writing. Just a brown cardboard cube with a small black ribbon. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single object, a figurine, hand-carved wood, worn at the edges, a garden gnome nearly identical to the one I'd been told to remove back when all this started. Taped to the bottom was a note in neat handwriting. Sometimes the smallest things are the first to fall. Sometimes they're what build the strongest foundations. A former enemy, I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled. And I placed it beside the others, right in the flower bed, where it belonged. That night, as I sat under the stars, the past year played back in fragments. The gavel, the containers, the vote, the fire, and the quiet rebellion that changed everything. Not because I was clever or powerful, but because I didn't back down, and neither did my neighbors. I don't know who sent that gnome, but I know this. In the end, power isn't what controls people. It's what they let control them. And once you take that back, once you shine a light where the shadows used to live, you don't need permission to be free. You just need a little courage. And maybe, if you're lucky, a neighbor like Clara. Looking back, this story wasn't just about a neighborhood or some shipping containers. It was about what happens when we let fear, pride, and unchecked authority take root in our own backyard. For years, we let a handful of people control how we lived, what color our mailboxes could be, how tall our flowers were, even when we could hang Christmas lights. And we told ourselves, it's just the HOA. That's how it works. But that's not how it should work. The truth is, communities are supposed to be built on kindness, on fairness, and on neighbors looking out for each other. Not intimidation, not threats, not silence. And maybe I didn't mean to start a revolution. Maybe I just wanted to get my truck out of the driveway. But sometimes, standing up once is all it takes for others to do the same. If you've ever felt powerless, like someone else is calling the shots in your life, I hope this story reminds you that you're never too old, too quiet, or too alone to push back. Because the moment we speak up, we invite others to stand beside us. So if this meant something to you, if it made you smile, or think, or remember a time you stood up for what was right, I'd love it if you gave this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone you care about. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, they don't just entertain, they remind us who we are. And more importantly, who we still have the power to become.